Welcome to the Startup Leader Show, where we learn lessons from leading startup founders and executives. I'm your host, Lisa Dreher, and I'm excited to introduce our guest for today, Randall LaVeau. He is the partner, advisor, and co-founder of Boss Partner or Capital Partners, and head of innovation at Boss Startup Science. Welcome to the show, Randall.
Oh, thank you so much, Lisa. I'm so excited to be here.
Absolutely. Maybe you can start by just giving us a little bit of background on both of the boss companies and then yourself.
Yeah. Well, real quickly, I started out in sales and marketing. My focus and what you'll hear on this podcast is really going to be around growth. Um, and that's on sales, marketing, service delivery support, essentially following the revenue chain. So I started in sales, quickly moved into marketing. I was a CMO at Magento Commerce during the divestiture from eBay, and then later the acquisition to Adobe. I leveraged that into a consulting career. Got really excited about being a CMO and helping different companies at different times. After I had fun with that, moved over into investing. And so this is where we started Boss Capital Partners, which is an investment syndicate. We focus on seed to Series A tech companies. We really look for companies that have a product market fit, but lack the operational expertise, right? And so what we've done over time is we've had 14 successful exits through Boss Capital Partners. And we've really attributed a lot of that success to our methodology, which we call BOSS. It stands for Business Operating Support System. And this is a methodology that not only covers on the business, vision, strategy, but also in the business, tactical execution, things like that. And we used it for transparency, not only for us, but for the founders within our portcos to really kind of see what was going on. After we've had a number of exits using that methodology, we decided to transform that into a company called Boss Startup Science. And so Boss Startup Science takes that methodology, it breaks it down into micro learning courses that you could watch, listen, or read. We have online workshops, interactive learning experiences where you literally learn, then take your own information to derive your outputs. And really what we're focused on, seeming that we came from Boss Capital Partners and our goal is to strategically exit companies. A big focus of our Boss Startup Science is beginning with the end in mind and leveraging a strategic exit strategy early on to kind of obviate and plot the course that you need to take in order to get to that strategic exit as quickly as possible.
Excellent. So when you look at what's happening in the markets right now, obviously there are a lot of changes in the financial markets recently. Are you seeing that impact how exits are progressing?
Yeah, well, it's the market's tough right now, right? We've recently shifted out of a market where money was flying around the startup community. Everyone's heard the stories of people in San Francisco, investors overhearing a story at Starbucks, and next thing you know, a company without a product has a $50 million valuation and is raising millions of dollars. Those days seem to be slowing down, if not over, right? So what is happening now is rather than just having a good idea and having the privilege or resources of knowing the right network to bring that idea to, startups are really forced to show their merit, show their worth. And the way that this is often done is one, through an evaluation or screening process, and two, through a diligence process. And so it's very important that folks do the diligence themselves, become experts themselves, so they can prepare themselves for what we call these major interactions, right? Anytime you apply for an accelerator, apply for a grant, try to get into an association or go to an investor, your company is being evaluated, right? And it's typically being evaluated, luckily, along similar standards across all those groups.
Mhm.
So we feel by getting a foundation set and in place very early on allows those founders that don't have the networks, don't have the privilege to be able to bring their companies in front of the right people, have the right talk tracks, answer the right questions, and meet the expectations of those people evaluating.
Right. Wow. Okay. So that's a great start. And I think that's going to have us jump into a bunch of other questions. Maybe we can start by having you talk a little bit about what you have seen as your biggest keys to your startup success so far.
Um, I mean, there was something someone told me at one point, which was measure twice, cut once. And I took this to heart, right? Unfortunately, early on, I took it too much to heart, and I was an over planner, over prepper. Anyone that's been in a sales role could relate to the story of doing a bunch of work to prep before you make a cold call, and then that cold call going right to voicemail, and all that work being for nothing, right? So how I eventually, found that phrase to work for me is um, I took the measure twice, cut once as there's two things that need to happen before I execute. So two measurements versus one cut or one execution. The first thing was I needed to be prepared myself and do the research and be smart. And I feel like founders, I'm a mentor for a lot of founders, and um, the worst thing to do as a mentee to a mentor is to come seeking all the answer and all the context. You need to come with some information yourself. And this is something that really hurts founders because unfortunately they're not able to give the context all the time. They're not able to give enough information. They get advice from a really good person, but that ends up being bad advice because that person didn't know the context. They didn't know all the different factors in play. So what I thought is I need to be prepared myself as much as I can. And then I need to have one other measurement, which is a validation point. And my validation points could come from multiple different sources, but the ones that I've landed on being the most reliable for me are user validation and subject matter expert validation. And so one of the things that I do is I keep two groups within all of the startups that I've ran myself or that I've invested in. The first one's a user advisory board. And this is a group of users that I meet with regularly, not only to get product and user requirements, but to help test features and make sure that I know before I release something that it's working.
Mhm.
The second point of validation is what I call the subject matter expert or industry advisory board. This group is people that I would seek mentorship from typically, someone that I would hope eventually would want to be on my board of directors once I got to that place of maturity. And really, these are the seasoned experts, some retired, close to retirement, or have just been in the industry for a while. And I had a close group of people that I worked with, which I called my industry advisory board, that I would take those big on the business questions, strategic vision questions, things like that.
Mhm.
And so those were my measure twice, cut once, my measurement and my preparation, and then using my validation groups, either my users or my subject matter experts.
Got it. So, one of the things that I think we talked about before we even got started here, and you sort of alluded to early on in our conversation, was this whole getting to an exit.
Mhm.
But I think that you kind of were suggesting that maybe there's things that you're doing way early on before you even start thinking about an exit. What is that process of finding those things and what do we need to be thinking about really before we even start thinking exit?
Yeah. Well, I stumbled into this, unfortunately. This is a lesson learned the hard way. Of beginning with the end in mind is really the principle here. And as founders, you understand this. The decisions you make right now impact the outcomes you seek tomorrow, next year, 3 to 5 years from now, right? And it's we always get in those situations where we wish we were asking the questions yesterday that we need the answers to today, right? Very, very difficult. So one of the analogies that I use to describe how to begin with the end in mind, or why it's important, is a GPS. Most people have them in their car, on their phone. You look at a GPS system, and the two coordinates that it needs in order to really work for you is where you are now, which it inherently knows. It's a good thing. And two is where you want to go, your ultimate destination. Now, the nice thing about GPS systems today is once you give those two coordinates, most cases you're going to get multiple options in terms of the routes that you could take to get to that destination. And this is very similar for founders, right? When you're very early on, and I like to say before you've taken any investor money, before you started, if you're lucky, if you're hearing this after, now, today is the time to do this. But is to really think about what your goal is, right? We do this. We have a purpose for starting our businesses. Guy Kawasaki said it's either to right a terrible wrong, preserve something, or make a lifestyle change to people. But on top of that, we also want money. We want a financial outcome for ourselves, whether it's millions, hundreds of millions, or more than that, right? The point is you need to start to understand how you could eventually get there. So there's three typical exits or destinations, I should say, for founders. You could go IPO publicly. You can be strategically acquired, or you could own and operate a lifestyle business. In most cases, a lifestyle business, you're really not going to be taking on money. Your goal is to get it to a point and live off of that, and maybe pass it down generation through generation. The idea is each one has a totally different route and major implications on the decisions that you make in terms of fundraising, hiring, go-to-market plans, product development, roadmap, features, all of the above. So what we like to do is an exercise that is very familiar in the military, which is called wargaming. And this is an opportunity to really plot our different outcomes that we could have, whether it be IPO, strategic, or lifestyle, and start to look at what the paths would look like, whether it be a path of maturity, a path of product development, a path of fundraising, all of which, like I said, the decisions you make today have implications on the outcomes that you seek tomorrow. One of the ways that I learned this the hard way is I was in a business that we started that we're in for 10 years, had two distinct customer bases, marketing and product, worked really hard at growing both of those. Got to the point after about 10 years where we said, hey, we think this is a good time to possibly sell this business. Took it to a prospective acquirer. They looked at the business and said, this is great. However, we are only interested in the marketing side of the business, your marketing customer base, basically 50% of the company. So the valuation that we thought we had and the money that we thought we were going to get for the exit was immediately cut in half. This was heartbreaking and just wasn't feasible considering the investments that we had taken on, the expectations and return on those investments. So had to leave that meeting, go back and really work hard for 2 years to essentially get rid of half of the customer base and fill it up with the right side of the business. Luckily, market conditions hadn't changed too much, and we were able to go back 2 years and get the exit that we sought. Although it was lower, we still got it. This was a big lesson, in terms of it is very hard to go back in time and not having the answers to the questions that you need tomorrow and not asking those today is very threatening to your livelihood. So after that became a core tenet of BOSS, which is identify your potential exit strategies or exit paths, your potential acquirers or fundraising vehicles in order to get there, and then really work at developing and identifying what we call valuation drivers and or KPIs that allow us to track the progress of the business.
Mhm.
One of the things that we learned in going through this, and I mentioned there's 3 paths: IPO, strategic, and lifestyle, is we've really settled on um, most businesses should be following an exit path to a strategic exit. Um, Now, that doesn't mean you have to sell your business, so there shouldn't be fear in that. But it's the idea of aiming for the sun, landing on the moon type of approach. And the reason that this is important is because as we started to develop this, we realized that there's a common life cycle that exists. In this life cycle, there's 2 points that founders have to be conscious of. One is they have to be conscious of the good growth that they have and making sure if they're interested in a potential strategic exit or IPO, that they leave a little bit of goodness for that transaction to happen, whether you take it public or you go strategic, right? You can't maximize and consume all of the benefit and profit yourself. Otherwise, you won't be as attractive to the open market or to a potential acquirer.
Mm.
Um, the other thing that we learned is not having not having the right mix of fundraising options for yourself is very dangerous. And many times founders believe that there's really 2, right? There's venture capital and private equity. Maybe there's some accelerators. But as you look, we've uncovered more than 28 different sources of fundraising for founders, 13 of which are non-dilutive, which is very important and founders should be looking at. Another good portion is of the crowdsourcing side of things, right? So these are ways that founders could really protect themselves, grow to their desired outcome or their desired exit without losing all the business. So,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. What do you see as the most common, I guess, things that founders don't think about or they're ill prepared for when they're going out and trying to exit? Are there things that they just aren't doing early on that they need to be doing to be ready?
yeah, the big thing I think is what we call standardization. Um, so I mentioned this to you before the call that getting into a transaction is potentially dangerous for a business if they're not prepared, especially if you're being acquired by an experienced acquirer, someone who is very active in the M&A side of things. Um, the diligence that will happen with an experienced acquirer will likely take the founder away from the business. You'll find yourself running reports, finding answers to questions that are being asked. And really, what happens as a result of this is the business starts to suffer. Well, in likely cases, once you've entered diligence, you're locked into some sort of legal agreement, with this potential acquirer. And while that's happening, the negative impact of your low performance as a result of you focusing on the diligence is causing the valuation to drop. And this could be very dangerous and it could happen very quickly, right? So one of the things that we focus on is as you move through your levels of maturity and as you start to grow and scale the business, it's very important to identify the repeatable processes that happen in your business and standardize those repeatable processes. This does 2 things. One, there's a hero syndrome that every founder experiences where you're wearing every hat in the business. And eventually you get to a point where your need to be in all aspects of the business is preventing growth. So by standardizing and writing out the best practices, basically the steps or instructions that any of the repeatable processes need to take, you're going to enable delegation, which is going to allow you to grow and scale the business much faster. The other thing it's going to do is when you sit down at that transaction, the other side of the table is going to look at you and say, how does your business work? If I'm going to buy your business, I need to understand the key components of the business and how they operate and how they work. or else it's not going to be a good acquisition for me. If you could pass across the table at that moment your book of standardized processes, all the things that that repeat more than once, your transaction and your diligence process is going to be much shorter and at much less risk of a decreased valuation or multiple as a result of that.
Great advice. Okay, so I want to end with one last question, which is if you could make one prediction about the future, what would it be? And I'm guessing it'll be something to do with exits.
Yeah. Well, what I'd like to see happen and it's more of a wish than a prediction, is the ecosystem, the startup ecosystem, invert itself.
Mm,
And right now, the investors, the big corporations, hold all the power at the top and all the money, right? And one of the reasons that they're able to do this is because they have a better understanding, more experience, and more knowledge on what's going on, what's happened in the past, and kind of trends leading to the future. So that lack of education, that lack of resources for a founder is really what has caused the ecosystem to grow the way it is, which is unfortunate.
mm,
When you look at just poverty in general across the world, um, less than 4% of people who are in poverty have the ability to get out of that and get to some sort of stability. Um, 98% of the people that do that do so through a windfall.
mm.
And a windfall is inheritance, which good luck, lottery, wish you even more luck, or starting a business, right? So 75% of those windfalls happen through starting a business, yet 90% of startups fail. And this repeats itself over and over again, right? The 90% failure rate has existed for over 10 years. And in 10 years, we have major advancements in technology, understanding business, ecosystem, markets. So my hope, and hopefully this works out, is that founders really take back some of that power and that leverage, and by building themselves up to the place where they can compete with some of these businesses and shake up the wealth that's being held up at the top right now.
Great. Well, I love that prediction. So as that comes to pass, we'll have to have you back on. We'll dig into that. So thank you so much for making time to be here today, Randall. It was a really enlightening conversation.
This was fun. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Sure thing.